Hey, everybody, welcome back to your Dawn of Autonomy podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting, and publisher at Autonomy Global. It is November, and we've dedicated this month to the theme of enablers, too, because last month was Mission Enabler. So we're talking more about all the different products and services that make this industry go. And today, as part of our Volatus and Above and Beyond series, in fact, the last Volatus guest of the year, we have Alice Griffith. She is with now Crown Innovations, and we're going to talk all about Alice and what she does and what Crown does. And it's so wonderful to finally have you on the show, Alice.
I'm excited to be here, Dawn. I'm excited to be part of the podcast.
Well, awesome, awesome. For those that have been in the industry, you've seen Alice. She's been in multiple roles throughout the years. And Alice, I believe you just joined Crown this year, maybe in the March timeframe. But before we get to that move, tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Sure. I kind of embody transportation, so I've done all different sides of it. I have about a little over 20 years in the industry at this point, but ultimately I started my first career in ground logistics or in food manufacturing, so using our 18-wheeler trucks and all those great things that have lots of regulations as well, like this industry. But moving mostly like food manufacturing touches everything, right? They touch airports, they touch hospitals, they touch restaurants, they touch grocery stores, they touch ports because you have things moving in and out of the U.S. And then they touch rail even because rail cars often have food on board. So I come from a world where I was very used to all these different logistics requirements that were needed for bulk cargo and fresh perishable items. And then I transitioned accidentally, like a lot of other friends, into aviation. So I didn't have the aviation background. I had some amazing family members that were fighter pilots and my grandfather who captained a aircraft carrier. But after that, nothing in aviation. So it was brand new to me and I stumbled into it in 2017.
Awesome, awesome. And multiple roles throughout the years in aviation, making your mark here as well. So interesting. I think that perspective, Alice, of kind of the logistics and all the different modes of transportation connecting, so relevant to what you're doing now at Crown. So tell us a little bit about Crown Innovations, formerly Crown Consulting, and what it is. And then I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about that origin story for the company.
Sure. So I joined Crown, like you said correctly, in March. It was a big move for me. I took over a business unit. So Crown had separated state government work from their federal government work about a year ago. And then I just took over as their kind of division lead recently. And ultimately, Crown as a company is a federal contractor. They do government contract works and everything too. We're probably most known for the work that we do with the FAA, NASA, even Department of Energy. So we have about 30 to 40 people that actually sit like front lines in those agencies with NASA, with the FAA, and even with the DOE, helping to plan the future of our energy grid, which is pretty exciting. But we also have a general contracting side to Crown as well, where we do infrastructure installation. So installation of towers, radars, things that are supporting our brand new air traffic control system that's going up as we speak. So I was excited to join Crown and kind of bring this world that I know of transportation to what is now the state and the commercial division of Crown. So I run that unit. We have a team and we do a lot of exciting things. I mean, there's a lot more in drones than just transportation. I just happen to have that background. And so we have commercial operations as well with people that are, working in the utility space or in the construction space, people that are manufacturing aircraft, and then also with the several departments of transportation for states, and then also several folks focused on delivery operations and things like that support transportation.
Awesome, awesome. Now, how did Crown even get started? I mean, it's really embedded in all sectors of government, working on all these really tough transportation problems. Do you know that origin story?
I do. So they're 37 years young this year. We changed the name from Crown Consulting to Crown Innovations, mainly because consulting just, I don't know, had a bad stigma to some degree, but innovations is more of what we do. We are trying to lean forward on the innovation side of aviation, having a specific niche for that. So we're not really master airport planners, we're not really master transportation planners, but we do have a very specific niche for especially the advanced aviation era. And so we have several different business units, but the origin is it's it came to be as it's a small company. We're only 250 people, and Alcon is the CEO, and he's been the only CEO since we started. So the company is, first generation and may move on to second generation, but it's really been operating like a small business, and we've done very well. Now that I've joined the team over the last 37 years, I can say that they've done a great job. I am just starting to contribute to it, but the origin of kind of coming into the space and really creating a brand, a known brand, a niche for advanced aviation, and kind of pulling out of even traditional aviation to offer that niche to the NASA agency, to the FAA, and to the DOE has been really where we've had some major impact over the last 10 years.
And we're going to talk about those business units in a minute, but I know you work the state government issues. And for everybody out there, if you're wondering why Alice and I almost look like we're in the same exact place, we are actually in sister hotel rooms, for lack of a better term. We're at the Lowe's Hotel here at Vanderbilt Plaza in Tennessee for the Tennessee Drone and AAM Symposium. So if you guys haven't set your calendars for Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern, check that out. You'll probably see Alice again, but we're going to be rolling through a whole bunch of different state level government folks that are here learning what Tennessee is doing and learning from each other. So really exciting times here to be on the road in Nashville. Hopefully you get to see some cool music and eat some good food. But let's get back to the business units and all the different lines of effort that Crown is working on. I believe we have a slide that kind of fairly embraces that. So we'll go ahead and pop that up as you walk us through.
Yeah, perfect. So we do have units dedicated to aerospace and advanced transportation. And then we have a data management and analytics unit, programs and engineering, and then integration and infrastructure. So I talked a little bit about these in the beginning, but they serve all the services that you see on the screen, cover most of what we do there. And ultimately, we support a bunch of different customers for strategic planning and implementation, especially on my side with state departments of transportation. We do a pretty good job with market and economic impact studies. At least I believe we do. We've been fairly recognized for some of the work there. And then mostly we spend a lot of time doing concepts of operation, writing documents, how people get waivers or do certification, advanced regulatory needs that they have. We have a great relationship with the tech center where we do simulation and flight testing. Lots of different things that kind of dive under that umbrella. And then safety and risk assessments, mitigation, helping people really shape their programs for UAS and AAM. Lately, we've been very involved in working on these EIPP applications. We've had quite a bit with our Beyond Management expansion, and then also with the Hollister project out with NASA, all the work that kind of falls under some of their different mission directives for aeronautics.
Okay, awesome. Now you used an acronym that many of our viewers may know, but some may not. The EIPP is the eVTOL, essentially, air taxi, if you will, integration pilot program that's kind of related to the Beyond program, which started out as the IPP for drones. And I know the application period is going on now, and people are vying for kind of to be those R&D sites, for lack of a better term. So Alice, really interesting. You guys are involved in so much. Let me ask you this. For those watching, in terms of people that you guys work with or your stakeholders, clearly federal government, clearly state, local, tribal, territorial governments. But when I hear things like you help people get waivers, or, are you working with individual companies as well, or organization like enterprise, as I think of, for example, the energy sector, or I think of, even maybe like a ski resort or something like that?
No, good question. Mostly enterprise organizations and folks that would have a manufacturing element. Sometimes they're manufacturing their own aircraft and they want to operate their own aircraft. Sometimes they're, looking at expanded utility operations, especially I think we have quite a bit of a growing sector around the US for utility expansion for, power, for gas, for anybody that's expanding that energy grid and wanting to monitor it or maintain it. But then also, everything that's happening with securing infrastructure. So we'll work with quite a few enterprise organizations that are in the power utility section and that are also in the construction section. And we've worked with aircraft companies, manufacturers that own their own aircraft or manufacture their own aircraft, and then they're trying to, get their 44807, or they're trying to operate their aircraft with a university or for at a test site to get, all their airworthiness certifications. but then also will help like the universities sometimes to stand up their programs as well if they are interested in expanding into a test site or partnering with the test site or just kind of capturing the area around them.
Okay, awesome. Now let's just call it your bailiwick, your area of expertise right now with Crown is around advanced air mobility. And, you talked about all the different kind of offerings. I know we have another slide about advancing solutions. I want to talk through this a little bit in more detail, only because there's things on here like data management and analytics, things like programs and engineering. So with 250 people, you have engineers, you have all these people that do these things.
Correct. And I run one small unit of Crown. So the other sides of it that we probably won't spend a ton of time talking about, but I would be happy to talk about more is what you just mentioned. So data management and analytics, that is where we are supporting the Department of Energy, and we are managing all of their data and helping them build out their energy grid. Like, what is the future of the energy grid? There's a lot that needs to be done for that, and the mapping and the support services that kind of maintain all of the infrastructure that's available, but also the energy supply that's being used, power grid plans of the future. So that's like one exciting area. Wow. Advanced aviation and transportation, that's like a lot of our NASA work. So there's a couple programs, but particularly the NAMS program and the DATS program. So they've had versions 1, they're all in versions 2 now, but there was originally a heavier lift on research and R&D. Now it's more on implementation, but NASA has several mission directorates for aeronautics, and we support almost all of them. And so for the advanced aeronautics and what UTM is going to be, how do vertiports get integrated into airports? How are some of these aircraft going to do longer distances? There's a lot of framework work that's been established at NASA that has flowed down to the FAA. Of course, they work hand in hand too, but that's most of what we've done under advanced transportation.
Okay, cool.
With programs and engineering, we could keep going, but like that's most of the work where we support AUS, where we do some work with the FAA in particular for a couple of different programs there. There's several I could go to, but CDIS is probably the biggest one that most people know about. And then integration and infrastructure, I touched on this, but most people don't know this about the Crown. And I think it's so interesting. We have a contracting side where we do actually install and upgrade and modernize infrastructure. So the equipment, the assets, towers, radar systems, things of that nature. So we do quite a bit there. And we have boots on the ground in all states.
That is so cool. Actually, the very first time I was introduced to Crown was at the Energy Drone and Robotics Coalition Summit. And I'm kicking myself because I cannot remember this wonderful woman's name. But I remember she told me that's where she worked, and she was working on towers and the infrastructure side of it. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. So I know you guys frequent a lot of these different shows, and, so that was really my first introduction to Crown. But, you guys also do regulatory support and, for OEMs, for operators. You mentioned getting waivers and other things, but what can you kind of flesh out this regulatory support aspect of what you do?
Sure. We provide regulatory support as one of our like core functions, core capabilities, whatever you want to call it. So I would say regulatory support and infrastructure are two primary leaders. We do quite a bit with data and analytics and program management, but those are really the two big ones. And we provide comprehensive assistance, really waiver rating, like I was saying, 91 or Part 107. We're, of course, all excited to lean into Part 108 and some of Part 145 when we get into those. We've also done some work with 135. But this is an area of our business that we expect to grow significantly in, with the regulatory support that's needed to navigate from either a company that's manufacturing aircraft, a company that wants to do and provide services, or even healthcare organizations, and they're trying to figure out how do they, comply with things when they want to bring in drone delivery, or they want to work or partner with a service organization, or maybe they want to even empower themselves to do operations. So there's quite a bit that we cover in the regulatory section. We conduct comprehensive command and control studies as well, which is another area that I think is expanding. And that is where we can help with like network design, engineering support for kind of building out the network piece. Also has regulations tied to it.
Yeah, I was going to say the regulatory work itself could, that could just be job security, right? Like forever. And especially, now with Part 108 on the horizon, and what all that's going to look like. because I think people on some level are thinking, oh, this is great. This is going to open the industry for, repeatable and scalable ops. But when you dig into that 700 pager, you see all of these requirements, right? Safety management type systems and, things, cybersecurity, like, which is frankly, Alice, and I think you'll agree, has been an afterthought for so many people. So I think peeling that back is going to be so significant, helping existing programs get up to speed, if you will, and then new programs kind of comply from day one, absolutely. But, you mentioned infrastructure and you just kind of in passing mentioned network design and development. What does that mean when you say network design and development?
There is a lot to unpack with that question, but
I know
that is, I think, so it's one of the reasons that we're here in Tennessee to do, we have a team doing a panel on infrastructure and kind of the next phase of what's needed for UAS and AM, but also it really, it's a good question, right? So if you get into your concept, enablement, enablers, what's needed for this industry to succeed, the network design and how that is going to be handled, also, the infrastructure that's going to be shaped around that, because there's physical and digital. But ultimately, it's the next phase, in my opinion, where we really need to put some focus. So we've got some understanding of where the rule framework is going to go for 108 and 146, but what's required in that is a lot of new technology that has to operate in a beyond visual line of sight capacity. And so if you are going to do that, then what is the network that you are going to fly on? Are you redundant to satellite? Are you using a certain spectrum? Do you have some new technology that is going to look at how it can pull spectrum from the different strength areas that it has? There's a lot of things happening, I think, within that space. So we've partnered with a couple of folks that are, I would say it's a little faster moving in the commercial side, because the state governments have to form their plan. Like as they form their advanced air mobility plans, and several of the states are publishing those plans, within that might be an infrastructure plan. And within that, maybe they're touching on what is the comms infrastructure or the network design of what's going to be empowered, or what's their goals to try to empower. A lot of states have fiber built out, they have ground power, but they don't have this lower airspace network. No one has that. So what is interesting is on the commercial side, you've got some folks like Florida Power and Light was a big leader in this space. And now you've got several, I think, other energy folks following behind them. But they had the ability to try to turn on and improve, modernize, if you will, their own network around their own assets. And that is going to empower them, and already has, to get to a higher level of operating than most other folks are that are out there right now. They've, I think, even quoted, and I can't say specifically where this was, but I think they were saying they were doing 1 to 30 style operations with their drone in a box systems, which is extremely advanced. Right now, we know that they took 5 years or so to try to move from manual operations into automated dock operations. But what is needed for anyone that wants to do that? We've got that with public safety. We've got that with utility sector. We've got that with people that are doing real estate. We've got that with new network concepts that are coming out from some of the industry stakeholders, particularly. But if you're moving from operating a drone in a manual capacity, even beyond visual line of sight with a waiver, and you want to move to automated dock operations, like, you need an entire network that has to support that. So we are getting into the design and the engineering of that, and helping people understand what strengths are available through field testing, but also what the future of that network needs to look like, and where to place those boxes for those operations to be best suited for your needs.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And, when you think about, as an example, Florida Power and Light, or, now they've got assets dispersed, but there's some, energy companies that maybe have, let's call it a campus. And that's a really great microcosm in terms of, like, all right, this is how we can make this work, like, maybe expand that out to an entire city. Because, now you're, like you said, you're talking about integrating not just the commercial operators, public safety, the healthcare people, like all kinds of people are going to be vying for this airspace, and the deconfliction issues, and, the communications issues. So let's talk about that for a second, because you need this network and it needs to be viable. Like, I know that's part of your portfolio as well. And, I'd have to give a shout out to Teal, who are our sponsors this month. We had Rob Monkman on the show talking about their eSIM and how it leverages, mobile network operators, from all over the world. I think 186 countries, he said. But like you said, there's satellite, there's other things, and that comms backbone is going to be so critical with all of these things up in the air, literally. So where do you guys fit into that larger picture?
So we provide services. We're mostly consultants. We do some of the installation and the upgrades, modernization of equipment on assets, things like that. And we'll do the studies. We do a lot of studies and reports. So majority of the time, if somebody wants a feasibility study or they want an analysis or something where they need to understand what their baseline is, right? So I want to set up automated drone dock operations, however you want to call it, or I want to move into beyond visual insight. I've got these technical components that I understand, or maybe they need help with that. But ultimately, like, how do they put the plan in place? So we get involved a lot of the times in the strategic planning and the visioning of things. That's probably our main role. And the studies, actually formally going out in the field and performing studies or doing an understanding of infrastructure. And we have the side that can do the permitting and the zoning and pour concrete and do upgrades if we need it for those types of things. But we don't manufacture aircraft. We don't fly aircraft. I mean, we have capabilities to do that. But our role is really partnering to help people get the strategy formed and shape the roadmap for where they would want to go with having to adhere to the next level of regulations.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important because a lot of these states or cities, their transportation roadmaps are like what, 10, 20 years out. And they just weren't thinking about this, I think, 10 years ago. Certainly not 20 years ago. And it was really interesting this morning during the kind of the opening sessions, how they've moved AAM under the Planning Bureau in TDOT, because they're coming to the realization, like probably you did early in your career, Alice, given your ground transportation background, all these things are nodes. They're all going to be connected. In other words, why bother to have an air taxi if it doesn't actually bring you to the airport or someplace useful in terms of facilitating mobility?
I think it's a brilliant move personally, because it is bigger than aviation. And
yes.
A lot of the times I think where I see some of our clients get stuck is, and I can't blame them, and this is not speaking for anyone, but it's not their job to have to plan the entire network for their state, because aviation is a piece of it and it happens to touch the lower airspace, but it's not their job to have to build all that out. So we've seen, in Ohio has a great story for telling, for building out their fiber network across Ohio, as many other states do. I think PA's working on quite a bit and has quite a bit to brag about as well, but they did it through their education world and through commerce. And so they built up those, they invested in the infrastructure of fiber so that they could move transport data faster for their research universities. Tennessee's coming in thinking about it the same way. They're saying, instead of it being an aviation problem to solve, because we have airports and we have other things that are happening in aviation that are their job, now let's figure out the planning that's needed to support advanced air mobility, because that is a whole nother concept. So it's part of this network grid. It's part of the connecting to the fiber. It's part of, figuring out, like you're saying, how does all the tech regulate? But if you take it down to the campus level, like you started to do, how does the healthcare use that network, or what are they building now that contributes to that network? There needs to be some form of plan. Else for, or otherwise, people like, and we don't actually work with Florida Power and Light, but I think what they've done is very impressive, and so people will follow suit. But they have the ability to do that because they are essentially private sector commercial, and they can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. But Vanderbilt's across the street here, like right out my window.
Yes.
And how does all of this play together? There's some, and it's interesting. I didn't realize that Tennessee is working with the Northern Plains UAS test site, to help them kind of build out their plan and what does that all look like? Because when I think of, we had that, what was it called again? The report from the Mercatus Center. It was very controversial, like who's the drone ready state? And it was North Dakota for a period, and then they got bumped out. At one point, it was like Arkansas. I'm like, what is going on in Arkansas? Like, I
remember the scoring.
Like, I don't even hear anything, but like, I'm sure there is stuff going on in Arkansas. It's just like, what?
But yes, for them to make top list.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. But like, when I think about the leaderboard and who's been doing stuff for a while, and I know you've been out there, Alice, North Dakota, it's like palpable, right? Like, the government people, University of North Dakota. Now you've got, Grand Sky, and of course the military base, like, which is in itself its own microcosm of like a little mini city with a mayor that is the wing commander. When all of those are swimming in the same direction or flying in formation, shall we say, just to use the right analogy here, that's when things happen. And, so it's really cool that Crown Innovations is working with other states, other cities to look at these best practices and say, here's what we can bring to the table. So as a practical matter, let's just say I am, from Tennessee, or let's just pick another place. Maybe we don't, Oklahoma's a big one, I think, is doing great stuff. I mean, you and I can talk about all the leaders right now, but like maybe like an up and comer, someone that isn't on people's like scope yet, but they want to be, right? They want to do stuff. Correct. They come to you, like, what do you do for them?
When we come in, like a state, an example of that. So Tennessee is, I think, moving in more to advanced air mobility. They're actually a good example. Alabama has put some time and investment and some contracting into advanced air mobility. So they're a recent one. You've got New York that's finally trying to put their AAM plan together, even though they were already essentially on the map, but there was not the state. The state was not on the map in a plan like your example of all of these kind of micro ecosystems are moving at their own cadence.
Yeah, like drone, like the public safety and using drones, and drone as first responder is big out there.
Huge, yeah, but nothing from the state level to support that planning, right?
Right. So now because you have also the test site out there, Griffith.
Yeah, Griffith. Correct.
Griffith. That is Griffith.
Yeah, Griffith, not Griffith. Yeah.
Air Force Base.
We had to say that 10 times last week.
Yep. So really cool. But you go in then, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, and you look around at what they have and you help them kind of build that strategic plan, I think is really kind of the bottom line.
Yeah, most of the time it's a strategic plan, on-call services, but a strategic plan essentially that gets the planning kicked off and going. So where I do think it's smart is tying in planning. It's not always, the state planning organizations are not always tied, or the departments are not always tied in, but usually we're supporting departments of transportation, sometimes just the Bureau of Aviation, sometimes both, but ultimately they're leaning in on a strategic plan or what the roadmap looks like. That's really most of the work that we do, is what's the roadmap that we need to start to publish an AAM plan. So what do we need to be about? What are the sections of that? And we can dive into all sorts of things in that element. So it could be the infrastructure is always a big consideration. Like let's do a scan of the existing infrastructure. Let's talk about the gaps, and let's figure out what the plan is to upgrade or modernize or innovate the infrastructure. But outside of that, there are events like today, getting event coordination even done, getting marketing, but helping to understand what studies they need. So there's a lot of feasibility studies. We do a lot of work with electrification studies. So there's quite a bit there for understanding your power grid. We do a lot of three-phase power studies where it might be at an airport, or it might be in general at a hospital even. It might be at a couple different areas that they're interested in setting up early adopter communities. And so we would have to understand their three-phase power application, because even if the world wants all of these electric vehicles today, we have to build the power grid out still. So there's quite a bit of work that is done there. Some airports are ready, not all. Some hospitals are ready, not all. And so there's a lot of planning that has to go into electrification and infrastructure and those types of things that are needed to support advanced air mobility.
Yeah, look, I don't want to, I have to really kind of foot stomp the complexity of what you're talking about, because even within one group, let's just take a university. Mm-hmm. I've taught at universities. I know, like, even in the DoD, add more complexity to that, United States Air Force Academy. But like, I worked at CU Pueblo, and even just the stovepiping between departments and the bureaucracy within academia, it's crazy. And then, so now they want to have like, a drone program, and say it's just the university maintenance people, and then the R&D people get wind of it, like in the aero department, they're like, wait a minute, we're going to do it too. So like, then it starts snowballing, and having all the right people at the table just in one particular market sector, and we'll call it academia or the university, is hard enough. And then you add in the hospital next door that maybe is not part of the university system.
Yes, that
and then you
stakeholder
add in,
coordination is the majority of what I spend my time doing. Actually, in my particular role, it's a lot of pulling in whether it's the state wanting to work with people within their state, or whether it's the folks that are in the state that should be talking to maybe the state, because there's shared components there. Everything comes down to these public-private partnership formations. At the end of the day, they're not all necessarily needing to be formed, but there's communication that needs to happen, and education and awareness for everyone to have knowledge of where the North Star is, because we're all a little off from that sometimes, but also the community engagement or the awareness, because there's some areas doing actual engagement, some that are really just educating or informing or bringing awareness to the community. Both are needed. But, that demand generation is an enabler. It's what is needed for this industry to move forward a little bit more. But we're all kind of in this space where we do need to come in and look at that North Star. And that is very hard to herd those cats.
Yeah, absolutely. Funding's a big part of that. You mentioned P3, public-private partnerships, but, I was at GeoGov Summit back in DC in September. And in fact, I wrote an article for Autonomy Global about it. It was P4, public-private philanthropic partnerships, P4. And it was around FireSat. And these are satellites that they put up to now help track and prevent fires. Not just like, oh, the fire's raging, let's track where it's going. It's like, wait a minute, there's an ember over here that can flare up. I mean, that's the level of fidelity they're doing. And so I guess my question to you, Alice, all the things you do you also help these folks, whether it's state, whether it's federal, whether it's enterprise, find the funding sources, whether they're public, they're private, they're philanthropic, to help those visions and those plans come to life?
Yes, we track a lot of program funding, whether there's a lot of federal funding out there right now, because I think our administration has kind of, pushed the gas on federal pilot programs for everything from counter UAS to, we talked about the EIPP with electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. There's also maybe coming soon radar pilot programs, and then we've seen the Beyond programs and some other community engagement types of programs. SMART are some other grant programs that I think a lot of people are familiar with through Department of Transportation at the federal level. But then there's also quite a bit that's out for Department of Energy has invested in quite a few programs. So we do find funding sources. Typically they all point back to federal funding at some point. But there's also some grant programs out there for healthcare in specific niches. For example, with the executive order, there was a focus on rural healthcare. So there's money out there to transform and put in rural healthcare transformation plans. And so how do you attach that funding to the state and bring in new technology to it? It approves emerging technology types of aircraft or ground vehicles to help enable rural healthcare. But how do you tie all those together? So a lot of times we're finding the funding sources, and we're helping understand like the strategic plan for why do you want this funding, and what is this funding going to do? Sometimes we'll help write applications to actually go obtain the funding. And then ultimately it's then the implementation of the funding, if awarded, will help on that side as well for execution of said pilot program. So Beyond 1 and 2 have been in our world of UAS program management. But then as we work towards EIPP, we hope that some of those are awarded and we're involved in those. But then also with rural healthcare, with counter UAS, with some of the other interesting things, then that will be where we want to be involved and execute those types of programs as well. So this finding and attaching funding, figuring out how to get that funding, and then actually making that funding work towards your goals. We're involved in kind of all sides of that.
Okay. All right. Soup to nuts, basically, in terms of program support in all different modes of transportation and infrastructure. Really, really important what you're doing, because like I always say, hope is not a plan. And, if you don't have a plan and you've got, like you said, pockets of excellence popping up all over your state, but none of them are talking to each other, that, this idea of shared infrastructure, right? Or, Jason Day from Austin, Texas, wrote about that in terms of, look, public safety's out there doing some investing in DFR, but like, Can the local school leverage that? Like, can you have, one pocket of drones and other things and infrastructure that you share, and that you can maybe even cost share to be more effective as kind of a municipality or something like that. So I think there's so many interesting ways to slice this, and I love that you're involved in it, Alice, especially with your level of expertise and background. Can you, I'm sure you've got, I know you haven't been there for a while, but Crown's been around for a while, and I'm sure you've heard some of the success stories. Maybe there's even been a handful on your watch in the short time you've been there. Do you think you could share with us maybe an exemplar success story in AAM in particular, or drones, that I think fairly embraces, what you guys bring to the fight in terms of enablers?
Sure. So we've done quite a bit of studies for NASA that would have application here. We were part of a team, or the group prior to me was part of a lot of the vertiport integration ConOps plan that was at DFW. So that's kind of this leading area of what is needed to bring in a new electric AM vehicle into an international airport, have the airspace, understand the airspace considerations, understand traffic movement, understand finding a location for different vertiports, and understanding the planning that would be required around an airport to adopt that and shift people over to, the funneling of people and everything over to these new vehicles in the new area of operation. So we were involved quite a bit in that publication. There's also the Hollister project is pretty well known under NASA. It's advanced, several advanced vehicles. You've got WISC, you've got reliable robotics, and quite a bit of other technology that are working together that are trying to do interoperability testing, UTM testing, like the Keysight to an extent, but with NASA's understanding of digital enterprise and digital network exchange and data exchange and things like that. So there's quite a bit happening in those spaces. As far as publications where we can point back to, this is what was the final product, this is what was created. The vertiport ConOps, I think is what it was called. There's also, for states, we've done Ohio's economic AAM impact plan. That was one of the ones where we put out a plan for the state. Working on North Carolina's plan for some stuff and the expansion of that currently, and hopefully some stuff with Tennessee. But then also we get into a lot of the work with healthcare, and what I can say is SUNY upstate New York is a big project that I can talk a little bit about, because they've been able to, they've achieved over 7,000 flights since 2019. And we have two models. So they have, they're a state healthcare system, but they have figured out UAS. They're only operating small aircraft now. As they merge into what could be with advanced air mobility vehicles and bigger vehicles, they're thinking about that, but they've had, 30 nautical mile beyond visual line of sight operations, moving pretty far distances, cancer drugs and pharmaceutical items between facilities. And what's really interesting about their use case is just all of the things that did have to come together as far as planning enablers for figuring out what they needed to do. They had real problems to solve, but we've seen a lot of health organizations that got interested to pilot, that got interested to try to do some form of testing operations, but they didn't last 5 or 6 years because it was either too hard, or the regulatory environment was keeping things from going the distances that they needed, or they needed state funding, or they needed to kind of partner up. What has been really interesting about SUNY is they've been pretty resilient. And I think it's because of the way they're structuring it. They're having an innovation department specifically geared at planning within their health organization that has really been, I think, the key change or the key enabler to figuring out how they can create their own destiny, kind of like what I was referencing with Florida Power and Light. They have to still walk this path with others, but they have to start it, and they have to be able to continue on that journey and figure out all of the pieces that kind of marry together. So I'm kind of giving some good examples, but at the same time, the publication, what's available to go download and read, there's a lot of documentation for NASA and FAA work, and then some state work. But the real meat, I think, is in when we get into the actual business application, and not a lot of that is published yet.
I see. Understand. When I think about the hospital use case with drones, I think about the original IPP. I think about North Carolina and WakeMed, and I know the type certification issues kind of gone a little bit to the wayside, but, at the time it was Matternet getting the first one. And I think it was in affiliation with that. And, so they really made their mark in that space doing similar things. But, the rural healthcare one, I think that's the nut to crack. And I think that's what's going to really change the game for so many people in improving their lives. Alice, I think about Alaska. I was up there a couple years ago for their, autonomy conference that they had. And, just the crazy statistics about how they have to almost do everything by boat, in certain times of year in certain locations, and how difficult
sea glider.
it is. Yeah. And, just the number of small airplanes in the air just because of this. And,
They do. They have some real challenges. I mean, not just weather. They get, I think, the understanding of weather, but there is a very unique aviation system up there that is what everyone relies on every week in their community to get their drugs, their food, whatever they need for essential
work. Some people
to get to work, to get to school. I mean, I was just up there recently. I was lucky enough to go to Naseo, and I was visiting Anchorage as a host for that conference. And so I did get to understand kind of their ecosystem, and it's really, really unique. And there's a lot that I would say with rural healthcare in particular, they could do. And any state almost could do no wrong in trying to enable rural healthcare. And that kind of takes me into, I know we got to probably wrap up, but one thing I wanted to say at the end is when we think about enablers, it's a hard question to answer, right? There is this kind of, each era of transportation has had all of these different enablers that have shaped or, allowed for the scalability of things. And as a generalist in transportation, I kind of look at the trends and I sit there and I say, okay, what happened that was different or enabled each of these kind of eras of transportation? And I'm bucketing them in like the rideshare Uber era. I'm bucketing them into the rail era of the 19th century, of the early aviation 20th century kind of focus. And we look at the patterns and we look at the shifts, and there was things that were enablers like capital and policy. I mean, the VC world didn't even really come to be until early 2000s. That drove a lot of the rideshare industry, but also the problems that existed with taxis and things of that nature. So you have like technology advancements that are part of it. You've got shapes in capital and policy, and then changing social behaviors, but the speed of things, the regulatory adaptation, the infrastructure requirements is another really big area that I think is just coming back to that, where enablers have to kind of be met. What's really interesting is you had all of these transportation eras that relied heavily on physical infrastructure. So rail and air and aviation, freight even in particular, that went through physical infrastructure, had to be there, steel, engine equipment, like all these technologies. And then you needed the actual road infrastructure. You needed several other things that had to be built, the rails that had to come together. With rideshare, it was completely the other spectrum. You had rideshare that came to be because of data, technology, smartphone era.
An app, right? And then the airports, as an example, had to find spaces like for those drivers to pick people up.
Think about that evolution, right? I was getting off the plane yesterday, walking to the rideshare. I'm like, I remember almost like 15 years ago now when these first things came out, and I was just picking up an Uber, without a lot of understanding of signage or where I had to go.
Like where am I going to find this guy or whatever?
And now it's figured out how to do it. Now it's very corralled and organized, right? And all of that takes time to unfold. So that's probably how we will see like advanced air mobility take place, right? All of this will just kind of be there, and we'll have to figure it out ourselves. And then slowly over time, signage and corrals and organization and stuff will come. But really what I think is so interesting, and I'll leave us at this, with rideshare being this kind of complete, digital infrastructure, relying completely on the digital infrastructure, and all of the previous transportation relying on physical infrastructure. Drones are the only area that is requiring both to come together. And drones, UAS, AAM, whatever you want to put the word on it. But that is, I think, why it's so challenging, because there's so much that has to really come together that's not one person's direct goal or job. And that is the beauty of where we have to bring everyone in for that North Star to kind of get the enablement of the industry.
I love that. AAM is a North Star. And, we are at time, but I have to give a shout out to Fahad. He is one of our writers for Autonomy Global. He is our Gen Next technology writer. In fact, I think his article either came out today or yesterday about digital infrastructure. And he's talking about public acceptance and things like this. Fahad, I'm going to address this in the article. So everybody stay tuned. I'm going to be writing an article based on this show. I'm going to ask Alice if you can look at that question and get your brain around it and send me a little note afterwards I can include in the article. That article will launch next Friday on Autonomy Global. So check it out. I'm sorry we're out of time, but I knew our time would fly, and it certainly has. For those that didn't know, all the value that Crown Innovations brings to the table in terms of advanced air mobility and so many other transportation sectors, and the infrastructure and the policy and the studies and electrification, everything that goes around all of these things. Now, it's almost mind blowing, and I can't believe how much we covered in 45 minutes. But it was so great to have you on the show, Alice. I think we learned a lot today. Really appreciate everything you're doing to help make this industry soar. And again, appreciate Lattice for having you on the show for their Above and Beyond series. This has been, I think, year 5 with them, and we're really appreciative of all the amazing people they brought on this show, their own employees, but so many others as well, like you. So thank you, everybody. That is all she wrote. We're going to put up the Crown Innovations website so you can check it out, find some of those reports Alice talked about. And Alice, thank you again so much. We are out here.